Yesterday, the prosecution in the Karen Reed case put out a detailed response to claims by the defense. Naturally, they used WCBB Channel 5. As I've said, you don't get more tribal than Channel 5 in the Boston Globe. That's where you go if you want to rally around the flag. So the prosecution made some astounding rebuttals. One side is not telling the truth, either the DA or the defense. Let's get into it. The prosecution had said in multiple statements that they are ethics bound to make their case only in court. The new chief of police even repeated that mantra, but I guess they're no longer ethically bound. So let's go over the rebuttals. We have to always do our best to avoid buying into narratives, certainly in court cases, but really in a lot of things. Was Trump a Russian spy? Did he pee with prostitutes in Moscow? You don't want to be too quick to buy into a narrative just because you prefer it or because it matches your worldview. Wait till enough evidence is in, weigh it objectively, and then, even after you've formed opinions, be willing to adjust it as new evidence comes in. This last bit can be really hard for human beings. It's difficult to change course. If there's one thing I'm sure of in this case, it's that this is in a very early stage and the evidence is conflicting and unreliable. So it's not wise to encase your conclusions in cement. Okay, let's get to the new prosecution claims. One of the things we should be looking for is general truthiness. The prosecution does not represent the Alberts or anyone else. They represent the public. I myself don't have a problem with them arguing for some of the evidence in public. There's a public interest at this point, though we can't have a media trial. But the DA's office must have the highest standard of truth when it comes to factual evidence. Think of it this way. Two of your kids get into a fight. You want to know what happened. They both tell you their side of the story. There are things that disagree in this story, but you weren't there and there's no way to determine the truth. But if you catch one of them saying something that you know is not true or is highly improbable, you can probably conclude that much of what he says is unreliable. So if anything the prosecution has told Channel 5 strikes us as dishonest or deceptive, we should question all of it. The article begins by accusing the defense of going on a fishing expedition. Right away, that's super shady. It's not a fishing expedition to demand access to the clothing of Officer O'Keefe. That's a normal part of discovery. And if the defense didn't do that, it would be legal malpractice. That clothing could have exculpatory evidence, such as DNA from someone inside the house or from the dog. The defense also has demanded the video surveillance of Karen's SUV from the town library. If that video shows her taillight was not broken, it's exculpatory. It proves her innocence. The defense has asked to examine the pieces of broken taillight. They want Karen's phone returned, and they want a forensic copy of Brian Albert's phone and related data. Do any of those requests strike you as a fishing expedition? I'm going to be objective about each point the prosecution raises in this Channel 5 story. But at this point, every word out of their mouths is suspect just based on calling these requests a fishing expedition. And keep in mind, not only are these requests normal, the actions by the prosecution and the police regarding these particular pieces of evidence is highly suspect because the evidence has been strangely withheld for over a year, despite multiple requests. Why has it been withheld? Even legal experts on a local NBC report said this was very unusual and could prompt the judge to throw it out. So the prosecution is jeopardizing its own case against Reed because it's weirdly withholding evidence. Why would they do that? Shouldn't the prosecution address this in their Channel 5 leaks? The prosecution's fishing expedition comment is mostly directed at the defense's demand for Brian Albert's phone. It says this request is not made in good faith and is only based on a purported conspiracy theory. Well, you have a dead cop on the homeowner's lawn. He'd been dropped off to attend a party there. The prosecution insists O'Keefe's injuries were not the result of being beat up. But unless it is truly sure of that, and based on the autopsy photos, that conclusion seems absurd. But unless it's sure he was not in a serious fight, the investigation should have included an inspection of the house. It should have included the people in the house. And if O'Keefe was beat up inside the house or in the yard, that is exculpatory evidence. So it's certainly no fishing expedition. The next thing they addressed was Jennifer McCabe's search for how long to die in the cold. This is crucial evidence. The prosecution claims the defense team is wrong in the claim that McCabe made this search at 2:27 a.m. They say that at that time she was searching a youth basketball website. Well, at this point, none of us in the public can say. One of those sides is either incompetent or dishonest. Karen Reed hired two of the most prominent and expensive attorneys in the business, and they hired a very respected digital forensics analyst named Green. If Green is wrong in this, he's destroyed his whole reputation. And in his line of work, reputation is everything. He'd be useless to testify at any other trial again. On the other hand, if the state police lab made a mistake, no one will face any consequences. They never do. They might even be rewarded for being a team player. But like I said, we don't really know, so we should suspend judgment a little on this key evidence for now. The next point they raised was the app data on O'Keefe's phone, which showed him walking 87 meters and ascending or descending 3 floors. The prosecution's argument here strikes me as laughable, nutty. They say these apps are unreliable, and they offer as proof of that the fact that O'Keefe's app showed he walked after he was already declared dead. I'm sorry, this is why we need to begin questioning media like Channel 5. Choose the red pill, for God's sakes. Channel 5 can't question that nonsense. Of course the app shows him moving. Do they think we're idiots? Unless the phone was left there in the snow, on the lawn, it would show him moving because the phone was moving. Or if it was a Fitbit, O'Keefe's body was moved. Who are these people in the prosecution? Are they that dumb, or do they think we are? I think honestly, at this point, the ruling tribe counts on people being zombies who just accept what Channel 5 or the Boston Globe or the New York Times or CNN says. Nothing to see. Move along, folks. Okay, sorry, let's move on dispassionately. The prosecution says that O'Keefe used his phone to navigate to the house and did not arrive until 12:24 a.m. I have a longer video coming out that goes into the evidence objectively in detail. The app data does not, in my view, absolutely establish that O'Keefe went inside the home. But he did walk 87 meters, and then in his last couple of minutes, another 25. It's possible he was walking around the yard, looking in windows, trying to get McCabe to meet him at the door, or maybe just getting in his morning exercise. No one saw him walking around the yard, but the guests inside the home also didn't see him enter it either. So whether he went inside is not going to be 100% determined by that app. But the prosecution either doesn't understand how a location app works, or it's being deceptive. My guess is the latter, but who can tell? Let's say you have an app for jogging on your phone. It's not tracking your every step. It's pinging your phone at intervals. Maybe it pings you every 2 minutes, and based on your new location, it calculates your speed and steps. I don't know what these intervals were on that app, but the data says he walked 87 meters between 12:21 and 12:24. That does not mean he arrived at the house at 12:24. It means at 12:24, that's when the next ping came. So if he arrived at 12:22, the data would say exactly the same thing, which means we really don't know precisely when he arrived at the door. We do know that when a witness in a vehicle outside, Ryan Nagel, drove off, O'Keefe was not in the car with Reed. Nagel never mentioned seeing O'Keefe. Was O'Keefe in the house? Probably, but it's inconclusive. It seems likely that if O'Keefe was wandering around drunk around the yard, Nagel would have spotted that. It's possible O'Keefe reached the door and no one let him in and Nagel didn't spot that. But the prosecution says O'Keefe was using his phone to navigate to the house. What does that mean? Was there some kind of maze on the front lawn? Was he using Waze to find his way? Did he put on a flashlight app? I think Nagel would have seen that. It's crazy anyways. There was a party going on. People were coming and going. Do we really think there was no light? No. O'Keefe got dropped off. He walked over to this driveway and it was a short walk up to the door. That's it. Navigate? And moving on to the autopsy. I'm going to show the most recent photos posted by Turtleboy in the next video. They're pretty clear, but let's avoid YouTube's wrath in this one. Here's a paragraph from Channel 5. It says, while the defense said O'Keefe suffered numerous defensive wounds on his hands, consistent with a brutal fight, and other injuries consistent with bite marks from a dog, the DA's office wrote that an autopsy report found no signs of an altercation or fight. The doctor identified abrasions caused by a blunt object, as well as bleeding and swelling around his eyes, which were related to small skull fractures. Let me translate this. The autopsy report didn't mention a fight, so that's that. Nothing to see. Move along. The DA is hiding behind that. They're saying, well, the report didn't mention it, so we have absolutely no interest in looking at the evidence. Yikes. Are you starting to get a little bit scared that our public officials have so little interest in telling the truth? Last year, we saw in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial where the prosecutor told the public and the jury that the video would show Rittenhouse chase down his victim and shoot him in cold blood. Then the prosecutor hit play on the video, which showed the exact opposite. Do you suppose the prosecutor thought it would fool the jury? No, it wasn't meant to. It was meant to fool us. Well, not us, but the people in the public who just blindly follow their narratives. The New York Times, the Boston Globe, Channel 5, college professors, union officials, Hollywood, high school teachers. These people aren't going to look at the evidence. They're not going to look at the actual Rittenhouse video. They just listen to the narrative they're told and go back into their trance because they're the good people. They care about the right issues, and their people wouldn't lie to them. Look, I don't know what these autopsy pics reveal. It seems to me O'Keefe had the hell beat out of him, but maybe if he got hit in the head by a taillight and it caused skull fractures, that would lead to both eyes swelling shut. His knuckles look to me like they'd been in a fight, but guess how many corpses I've analyzed in my life? Guess how many autopsies I've done? Maybe knuckles get like that after several hours. Maybe the cold is a factor. Maybe the bruising is rigor mortis. I'm not sure how an SUV could make those marks on his arm, but maybe there's a way. It seems to me we'd learn a lot more from O'Keefe's clothing, but the prosecution doesn't want the defense to have that clothing for some reason. The next item was the pieces of taillight. The prosecution says the pieces matched exactly what was missing from the SUV. I can't dismiss that, to be honest. If it's an exact match, that means that either Karen did hit him or someone traveled to where her SUV was and took a piece of taillight and planted it at the scene. The defense is implying that maybe Trooper Proctor did this. But man, why would he risk ruining his life to do something that blatant to cover up a murder? Maybe you do that for one of your children. But anyone else? Wow, it's just hard to imagine. There are oddities, however. The Canton police searched rigorously that morning using a leaf blower, presumably to melt snow. They found no taillight glass, only a broken cocktail glass. However, 12 hours later, in the dark, the state police found a few pieces of taillight glass. Then a week later, strangely, the chief of police was driving by, and he spotted yet more glass. And my understanding is that this was the piece that really made the match to Karen's SUV. That's weird, wild stuff. However, we have to consider the snow. It snowed several inches during the first day of searching. Maybe that explains why the Canton cops couldn't spot any glass. And maybe melting snow over the week explains why the chief spotted something that couldn't be seen before. We should remind ourselves that there's an Albert on the police force in Canton and 2 on the waiting list, and Chris Albert is on the board of selectmen. One of the guys partying in the house was ATF agent Brian Higgins. For some reason, he has an office at Canton Police Headquarters. Also, after this long night of drinking, for some reason, he went to work in that office after leaving the party at 1:30 a.m. Was he trying to establish that he was at work and not at the scene of the crime? I don't know. Well, the day the story first broke, the chief of police contacted a local reporter to get Albert's name scrubbed from the story. Like I said, weird, wild stuff. The prosecutors also addressed the defense claim that Proctor is a close friend of people inside the house. They point out that a photo purportedly depicting the trooper with members of one of the families has no actual relation to the Klan. What I find interesting about that is the Clinton-esque wording. They say a photo has no relation to the Klan. At least 3 photos were published. So the prosecuting is disputing one of these photos. Does that mean the other 2 do show a close connection? Look, we need good cops, and we have a lot of good cops. I don't want to be smearing Trooper Proctor if he's an honest cop who did nothing corrupt. If it turns out that these accusations are wrong, I'm going to feel really bad. Maybe I can wash his car or something to make it up. But when you look at all the oddities in the case, you have to at least raise some questions. As Turtleboy points out, Proctor later changed the cell phone number provided by Brian Albert. This does seem like an effort to shield Albert, just as the chief was trying to shield. He changed photos, changed times, misspelled names. If nothing else, the report was sloppy. And Proctor seems to have played a role in other ways to hide things from the defense. But evidence for that comes only from the defense. So maybe some of it will be explained later. We'll find out at the trial. Finally, the prosecution goes to great lengths to show that Karen Reed was supposedly fighting regularly with O'Keefe, including that night. Now, that seems cheap. At this stage, we should be looking for hard evidence. If it comes down to a trial, they can introduce that stuff as possible motive. But for now, come on. Couples fight. It's not relevant to the evidence. It feels desperate. Finally, we have to address the things that the prosecution leaves out. They don't seem to be disputing that Jennifer McCabe made deletions on her phone. Not only does this imply consciousness of wrongdoing, but when they were deleted matters. 2 days after the death, Reed's lawyers demanded McCabe and Albert's phones. That is when McCabe started deleting calls from that morning. I don't think they have Albert's phone, so the defense doesn't know if he deleted anything. Be interesting to see. But McCabe's act of deleting evidence in a possible murder case is obstruction of justice. She could be indicted for that alone. Maybe the prosecution will dispute that she deleted anything, but they didn't yesterday. It seems they would have. I've already mentioned the prosecution fails to address why discovery evidence hasn't been turned over, other than to talk about fishing expeditions. So we have a case where no investigators had any interest in investigating the home where a cop was found dead on the lawn and looked, at least possibly, beat up. They didn't inspect the homeowner or any guests for wounds or signs of a fight. They apparently didn't look for DNA evidence on the victim's clothing. And they've denied the defense team access to discovery evidence it's entitled to. Now they're trying the case in the media and being very selective about what they leak and parsing their words. Massachusetts used to have a marketing pitch. You can make it in Massachusetts. Well, I suppose you can. But you better be willing to play ball with the tribal power structure. And if you aren't part of that structure and you become expedient, tough luck, because most citizens in this state will never question Channel 5, which does all the thinking for us. We should just be grateful. Okay, thanks, guys. If you never want to see any of my videos again, don't click subscribe and notify, because unless you've clicked notify, I'm unlikely to ever show up in your suggestion box. Thank you.